Now, besides the speech and the moment of silence, what else did the president do today?
Well, the president actually took some time to walk around and talk to the family members because this is their day. While the entire United States mourns the loss of the people who were killed, the family members are the ones most affected. And in fact, Vincent, that's why I'm talking to you here on this side of the Pentagon instead of the other side where the memorial is, to give the family members the space that they need to mourn. And just as the president is doing that, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis is planning to send additional U.S. troops into Afghanistan. Afghanistan was where these attacks were planned, and there has been a 16-year fight to try to help the Afghan people retake their territory from the terrorists who have been planning attacks against the United States and other members of the West. And also, while all this is going on, the United States is fighting Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and we just learned that the United States and the U.S.-led coalition has helped its local partners regain about 3/4 of the territory from the terrorists there, the same terrorists that also would like to attack the West.
Now, we know it's been 16 years, but it looks like every time this time comes around, it does actually bring up these very raw memories, right?
Absolutely. Very raw, very painful memories. This is a day that will not be forgotten, not here, not anywhere around the United States. This military is preparing that fight because of that day. The people, the family members here are mourning the losses lost that day, and it doesn't matter how much time passes, this day will always be remembered and will always be mourned.
Carla, thank you very much, as always. That's VOA's Carla Babb reporting live from the Pentagon. And talking about terrorists, in East Africa, Somalia military officials say up to 17 people were killed during heavy fighting between government soldiers and Al-Shabaab militants early Monday. The insurgents attacked a military base at Balad Hawa town with a car suicide bombing before entering the compound. Government forces later regained control of the town on the border with Kenya. In another attack on Monday, at least one person was killed and 3 others injured when a car bomb was triggered in Mogadishu. A police officer says the bomb was concealed in a parked vehicle. Still in East Africa, in recent months, a spate of unresolved murders of young women in Uganda is putting rare public pressure on a police force long accused by opposition politicians of spending more time suppressing political dissent than tackling crime. And the widespread media coverage of the appearance of 20 corpses beside roadside south of Kampala since May reflects the public's anger with police for repeatedly saying they have arrested the perpetrators, only for another body to be discovered. In the Wakiso district south of Kampala, where most of the victims have been found, few residents have faith that the killings will stop.
We live in fear. We cannot cultivate our farms anymore because we are scared of being attacked while at work. We barely sleep at night because we need to stay alert, and when it rains, you can't clearly hear what's happening outside. We are so afraid our hearts are not settled.
I refuse to simply accept that all these are related to domestic violence, because Ugandans have not just started living together, man and woman, and all of a sudden they have discovered a new trick of
Now, the government has defended the police, who say they have arrested 30 suspects and charged 13 of them, listing possible motives ranging from domestic disputes to sexual abuse to ritual murders linked to human sacrifice.
We intensified certain mechanisms, policing mechanisms, crime prevention mechanisms. We increased our community policing, which is the mechanism of getting in touch with the people more. We increased our patrols, focused patrols, both motorized and foot, and of course supported by the community in these areas. We popularized the crime, the neighborhood watch scheme.
Well, to acknowledge public outrage, lawmakers stopped work for 2 days last week after the 20th body was found, saying ministers had failed to appear before the legislature over the killings in 3 districts on the outer edge of Kampala. Now, a leading humanitarian aid group is accusing the European Union of being complicit in the torture, killing and rape of migrants in the Libyan detention camps. The system is partially run by armed militias and human smugglers, and critics say the EU is supporting these groups in return for stemming the flow of migrants across the Mediterranean Sea. And Ridgewell reports from London.
Thousands of migrants desperate to get to Europe are being held in detention centres across Libya. Conditions are better at camps like this one, run by the UN's International Organization for Migration. But away from the cameras and the glare of the global media, aid group Doctors Without Borders says armed militias in Libya are detaining migrants in horrific conditions, where they are subject to torture, rape, starvation and killing.
And basically, how I will describe those detention centers are, for me, manufacture of suffering at industrial level.
Migrants picked up at sea by Libya's EU-sponsored Coast Guard are sent back into the country's murky detention system. MSF describes it as a thriving enterprise of kidnapping, torture and extortion, and accuses Europe of complicity.
Are they okay with containing and sending people back to where they would be raped, tortured, and enslaved? Are they okay aiding and abetting criminals and smugglers?
The EU's Executive Commission denies ignoring the treatment of migrants in Libya. Italy has led the European operations there. Speaking Thursday, Italy's Prime Minister pledged he will demand improved conditions in the detention centres.
But this commitment cannot go against our commitment to fight against the human smugglers and the flow of migrants into our countries.
The EU is struggling to balance public pressure to end the migration crisis with the bloc's much vaunted human rights values, says Libya analyst Riccardo Fabiani.
This is the problem and the paradox here, that Europe needs, at least from the point of view of the authorities, to do something about migration, to reduce migration, and the only way to do it, again, from the point of view of the authorities, is to reach a deal with the various parties and actors involved in human trafficking. But the price to pay for this is human rights violations, effectively accepting that a degree of violence and human rights violation will take place.
Fabiani says Europe appears increasingly willing to pay that price to end the crisis. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Well, the World Health Organization says a cholera epidemic sweeping across the Democratic Republic of Congo has claimed the lives of more than 500 people. The WHO has dispatched a team of experts, including epidemiologists and public health specialists, to Congo in an effort to contain the disease. Outbreaks of the waterborne disease occur regularly in Congo, mainly due to poor sanitation and a lack of access to clean drinking water. Now, this year's epidemic, which has already hit at least 10 urban areas, including the capital Kinshasa, is particularly worrying as 1.4 million people have been displaced by violence in the central Kasai region. The epidemic has spread to 20 of Congo's 26 provinces. Health officials say they have recorded more than 24,000 suspected cases of the disease across the nation this year alone. Now, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook. So check us out and share our show with your friends also. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Now, find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Coming up on Capitol Hill, bipartisan agreement on hurricane aid. But will the cooperation last? Stay with us. Well, in the southeastern United States, Hurricane Irma has weakened into a tropical storm Monday as it moved over northern Florida and into southern Georgia, even as its torrential rains and dangerous storm surges remained a threat to produce coastal flooding. Now, the National Hurricane Center warned that swells generated by Irma along the southeastern coast could still cause life-threatening surf and rip current conditions. Now, the Hurricane Center also says tornadoes are possible across northeastern Florida, southeastern Georgia, and South Carolina through Monday night. By Monday, Irma's sustained winds diminished to 110 kilometers an hour, according to the Hurricane Center. But tropical storm force gales extended over a wide region up to 665 kilometers outward from the Irma center. On Monday, President Trump declared Florida a major disaster area, a step that will release federal aid funds for storm victims more quickly. More than 76,000 people checked into 400 emergency shelters statewide. But overall, only 3 storm-related deaths were reported in Florida through late Sunday. Well, Hurricane Irma battered Florida only days after the U.S. Congress approved $15 billion for disaster funding. VOA's Michael Bowman reports the bill will bankroll hurricane relief efforts and give Washington a reprieve from fiscal deadlines. But it remains to be seen whether bipartisan action on Capitol Hill will last.
As Irma punished Florida, a plea from its governor.
I ask everybody to, the most important thing is to pray for us. We've done everything we can to be prepared.
Earlier, a pledge from the White House.
We are doing everything we can to help with disaster preparations. And when the time comes, we will restore, recover, and rebuild.
The president spoke after Congress injected $15 billion into relief efforts for Hurricane Harvey, which devastated Texas, and now Hurricane Irma.
But whatever happens, we're going to stand by the people of Florida and the Carolinas and others affected, just as they have stood by us in Texas and Louisiana as a result of Hurricane Harvey.
Urgent need prompted Congress to rally in bipartisan fashion.
Mr. President, if there's any good that comes from tragedy, it's that for a brief but beautiful moment, we are able to see each other as we truly are. Not as Republicans or Democrats, rich or poor, black or white, but as members of the same community, partakers of the same human condition.
But some dissented, noting the relief funds were not offset by spending cuts, tying them instead to a hike of the federal borrowing limit.
We as a country have a $20 trillion debt. We borrow $1 million every minute. Nobody has the courage to say, why don't we pay for it?
Others objected to a short-term extension of current federal spending levels.
There is no point to discussing our strategy for Afghanistan or North Korea or ISIS or any of the other myriad of threats we're currently facing if we're simply going to fund the military through a continuing resolution.
Legislative battles to come will test last week's bipartisanship. Republicans want to reform the U.S. tax code. Democrats are demanding protection for undocumented immigrants brought to the United States as children.
800,000 dreamers anxiously await action by this Congress. There is no reason to wait. Let's put a clean DREAM Act on the floor, which I believe would pass by a significant margin, and tell these hardworking dreamers that they belong in this country too, the country they want to be part of desperately.
The total cost of hurricane relief and recovery is not yet known. Lawmakers say even more funds will be needed.
This $15 billion package, this is only temporary. It will probably only take us through mid-October at the most.
Last week, President Trump sided with Democrats on tying disaster funding to 3-month fiscal measures. Congress will have to revisit federal spending and the debt limit in December. Michael Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, a Mogadishu car mechanic like no other. We'll be right back.
just joined us, I'm Mariama Diallo, and here is a quick recap of today's headlines.
The Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara declines the proposal to take over the leadership of his party, the Rassemblement des Républicains. In Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta holds his first rally over the weekend in Nairobi ahead of the election rerun and criticizes the Supreme Court's decision to nullify the August 8th presidential election. In South Sudan, women and youth groups organize a peace concert in the town of Rumbek, highlighting the powerful role of women in society. Tunisian Prime Minister addresses the parliament ahead of a confidence vote as an electoral deadline closes.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Welcome to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Electric scooter sharing, the latest trend in Berlin. Over 1,800 electric scooters from companies are available in the German capital for anyone with a smartphone app and a driver's license. Users simply use the app to find the nearest scooter, walk to it and use the app to unlock it and take a helmet from the box. The concept of scooter sharing came to prominence in San Francisco in 2012 when a company called Scoot introduced a sharing scheme in the city. Outside of Europe and San Francisco, scooter sharing is only available in Taipei, Taiwan, and Beirut, Lebanon. Well, next up, a host of French-owned fashion labels spawning Christian Dior to Saint Laurent pledging to ban ultra-thin models from their advertising and catwalk shows, following criticisms that the industry encourages anorexia. LVMH and Kering, which own dozens of top brands between them, unveiled a charter to ensure the well-being of models, which will also outlaw the hiring of girls under the age of 16 for adult shoots or events. In May, a French law requiring models to present a doctor's certificate attesting to their good health was introduced to try to tackle the problem of the industry promoting thinness and unattainable beauty ideals. And that is what is trending today. Now, Somalia has been without an effective central government since 1991. Persistent threats of violence by the Somalia-based Al-Shabaab terrorist group has displaced citizens and disrupted the residents' way of life. But amid these challenges, there is hope, inspiration, and even boldness from a young female mechanic. Africa 54's SU Gidui Yuwat has that inspiring story.
It is a first in many ways for 18-year-old Nasra Haji Hussein. She is Somalia's first female auto mechanic working at a service garage in the capital, Mogadishu. 2 years ago, Nasra embarked on a 10-day journey from her home in Hiran to get to Mogadishu in search of a job, but working as a mechanic was not one of the options in her mind. After several months of job hunting without success, she approached mechanics at a service garage and found an opportunity as an apprentice. In this male-dominated field, Nasra was ridiculed and discouraged by many, but she says over time she was able to build a regular customer base in a country where jobs are scarce.
I repaired different types of cars, luxury cars, bulletproof cars, and pickups. Sometimes I service trucks when they are brought to the garage.
For many youths in Somalia, getting education or even finding a job is difficult with the economic and security challenges Somalia continues to face. Nasra says her hard work supports her elderly father and mother, who is unwell. Somalia has been without an effective central government since the overthrow of dictator Mohamed Siad Barre in 1991. Successive governments have been embroiled in war with Islamist rebels who want to impose their own harsh version of Sharia law on the nation. Working in what is traditionally seen as a male domain, Nasra says she was chided for taking up the job, but over time she began to win customers like Nooks Sheikh Abdi.
She has repaired my car very well, and she did it right on time, just as we agreed.
She says with her father's encouragement, she is able to make $300 a month at the garage.
When I came to the city, I wasn't encouraged. No one offered me a job, so I decided to become a mechanic to help my family. When I got paid and sent money to my parents, my father asked me where I got the money from, and I told him that I'm a mechanic. He encouraged me to work harder.
By challenging gender stereotypes in a country like Somalia with limited opportunities, Nasra has been able to acquire new skills and build a career, and at the same time improve the quality of life for her family. After work, she spends time relaxing at home or having a friend come over for a cup of tea. Estegidui Ewart, VOA News, Washington.
Indeed, any girl can do everything boys can do, including in Somalia. Now that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa. That's between 0300 and 0600 UTC Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching from all of us in Washington. Have a good night.
U.S. President Donald Trump marks the 16th anniversary of the worst act of terrorism on American soil. Hurricane Irma pounds the Caribbean and the state of Florida, leaving devastation in its wake. And in Mogadishu, a car mechanic does her part to challenge gender stereotypes. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday marked the 16th anniversary of the worst act of terrorism on American soil in a ceremony at the White House with a moment of silence at 8:40 a.m. local time, the time when the first airliner hijacked by al-Qaeda terrorists crashed into the World Trade Center in New York. Well, a second jet hit the second World Trade Center tower 23 minutes later, and the huge skyscrapers collapsed in flames and smoke soon afterwards. President Trump also attended a remembrance ceremony at the Pentagon, which was hit and badly damaged by another of the 4 commercial jets seized on that fateful day. The president spoke in remembrance of those who lost their lives on that horrific day.
Here on the west side of the Pentagon, terrorists tried to break our resolve. It's not going to happen. But where they left a mark with fire and rubble, Americans defiantly raised the Stars and Stripes, our beautiful flag that for more than 2 centuries has graced our ships, flown in our skies, and led our brave heroes to victory after victory in battle.
Well, as we have mentioned, 16 years ago, the U.S. Department of Defense came under attack. American Airlines Flight 77 was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon, killing all passengers on board the plane and 125 people working in the building. VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb spoke with 2 men forever impacted by the attack. She brings us their story in their own words and takes us to the 9/11 Pentagon Memorial built to honor those lost in a day that forever changed our world.
You know, I always feel like this is sacred ground. I stood here on September 11th.
You can see from some of the smoke that's coming up from behind me.
And to someone who lived through it, it's kind of a defining moment in your life.
Which would indicate that the entire plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon.
There were 184 people that were killed in the Pentagon, 125 in the building, and 59 on the plane. My brother-in-law, who's a DC homicide cop, was able to walk through the building because he knew people in the FBI. And he told us that we need to prepare for the worst because nobody was trapped in the building. If people hadn't gotten out by then, or within the first probably 4 or 5 hours after the attack, people weren't coming out.
And to see this building, which is such an iconic structure and almost looks like a fortress, to see part of it just crumble down into rubble and realize the number of people who died in the building and on the plane, it was one of those days when you could feel the world changing.
My brother Dave, my younger brother, was killed in the Pentagon on 9/11. I do this to honor my brother's memory and to honor all the people who died here, so we never forget them and remind people about what happened that day. When you first walk in, that is the essentially the zero line. So you basically come up to, and it's got September 11th, 2001, the time of the attack, 9:37 a.m. The first couple of benches you see, and you start to figure this out, if this is 2001, you'll see a 1998 age marker there. You start to figure out that this was the 3-year-old little girl, Dana Falkenberg, who was on the trip with her parents and who died in the plane. And you can see that her bench is pointing toward the Pentagon, because when you go and read the name at the end of her bench, you'll see the sky in the background, which signifies that Dana died on Flight 77. This is actually my brother Dave's bench. It's on the 1961 age line, which signifies the year that he was born. And when I read his name and look and see the Pentagon in the background, that signifies someone who died in the Pentagon and in the building. The benches are also arranged according to the flight path of the plane into the building. You're kind of oriented to where the plane hit. The designers wanted a place like no other because 9/11 was like a day like no other. So it provides that for family members and visitors.
Well, viewer, Pentagon correspondent Caleb Babb is standing by live at the U.S. military headquarters in nearby Arlington, Virginia. Caleb, what a somber day today.
Absolutely, Vincent. A very somber day. President Trump telling people here that we are here to mourn those we lost, we are here to honor them, but we will never, ever forget them. And this was also a time where the U.S. military, which is headquarters here, showed its strength. President Trump saying that more than 5 million U.S. men and women had joined the armed services since the attacks on 9/11, and Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis saying that the U.S. military was not like seaweed drifting through the current, but was resolved and would not be scared by outsider attacks. He also pointed out that on September 11th, 2001, the United States came together and heroism abounded in New York, where more than 2,600 people were killed, in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where the plane went down after the passengers overtook the hijackers there, and here at the Pentagon, where 184 people were killed.
Now, besides the speech and the moment of silence, what else did the president do today?
Well, the president actually took some time to walk around and talk to the family members because this is their day. While the entire United States mourns the loss of the people who were killed, the family members are the ones most affected. And in fact, Vincent, that's why I'm talking to you here on this side of the Pentagon instead of the other side where the memorial is, to give the family members the space that they need to mourn. And just as the president is doing that, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis is planning to send additional U.S. troops into Afghanistan. Afghanistan was where these attacks were planned, and there has been a 16-year fight to try to help the Afghan people retake their territory from the terrorists who have been planning attacks against the United States and other members of the West. And also, while all this is going on, the United States is fighting Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and we just learned that the United States and the U.S.-led coalition has helped its local partners regain about 3/4 of the territory from the terrorists there, the same terrorists that also would like to attack the West.
Now, we know it's been 16 years, but it looks like every time this time comes around, it does actually bring up these very raw memories, right?
Absolutely. Very raw, very painful memories. This is a day that will not be forgotten, not here, not anywhere around the United States. This military is preparing that fight because of that day. The people, the family members here are mourning the losses lost that day, and it doesn't matter how much time passes, this day will always be remembered and will always be mourned.
Carla, thank you very much, as always. That's VOA's Carla Babb reporting live from